The wind carried a thin line of dust across the empty stretch of land, moving slow and lonely like it had nowhere left to go. The desert held its breath under the late afternoon sun, the kind of heat that made the sky shimmer and the distance blur. In that wide silence, a young pregnant woman stumbled forward, one hand pressed against her lower belly, the other shielding her eyes from the light. Her boots dragged through the sand as if every step cost her a piece of strength she could not afford to give away. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting trouble to rise from the horizon at any moment. Her breathing was fast, uneven, and full of fear. She looked like someone who had already run too far, yet knew she had to keep going. When she reached the old hanging frame standing alone in the open ground, she almost collapsed. 4 men hung from the wooden beam, their bodies motionless, their heads slumped forward. Dust clung to their trousers. The ropes creaked lightly as the dry wind moved through. She stared at them with a mixture of dread and sorrow. She looked like someone who had seen too much to be startled by death, yet still soft enough to feel it in her bones. She placed a hand on the rough wood of the frame and whispered to herself as if hoping the land might hear her. She did not know how long she stood there, only that fear pushed her to keep moving. She stepped back and murmured, "Please, I must run for my baby. I can't stop now." Her voice cracked when she said it, the words trembling in the heavy air. She had no reason to speak to the hanged men, but the world had grown so empty around her that even the dead felt like company. She took one last look at the still bodies before turning to leave. The sand shifted under her, the wind lifting her worn skirt in a slow, restless motion. She pressed her hand to her belly again, whispering to the small life inside that she would keep moving, no matter how tired she was. Then something changed behind her. It was not a loud sound. Just a faint tap of rope against wood, then a small breath that did not belong to the wind. She stopped mid-stride. Her shoulders tensed. She turned her head slightly, not sure if she wanted to look or if she feared looking too slow. The hanging frame stood where she had left it, the 4 bodies still suspended in place. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The second man from the left no longer hung limp. His fingers twitched. At first she thought it was the wind again. But the other ropes did not move. The other bodies stayed still. Only one hand shifted, then curled slightly, so slight that anyone else might have missed it. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She stepped back slowly, her boots scraping softly across the sand. She stared up at the man's face, waiting to see if the movement had only been a trick of her. Tired eyes, but then his eyelids lifted. The woman gasped and nearly lost her balance. The man's eyes were dry and dark, as if they had been closed for a long time, but not long enough to belong to the dead. He looked down at her, and for a moment neither of them moved. The desert wind stopped, as if the whole land was trying to listen. His chest rose the smallest bit, enough for her to see breath where breath should not be. She stepped back again, shaking her head. "You're not supposed to be alive," she whispered. The man did not speak. His lips parted slightly, as if he were trying to draw in more air, but the rope around his neck held him frozen in place. His eyes locked on hers, not pleading and not afraid. They held something else, something she could not read but felt deep inside her stomach. His gaze had a weight that pressed against her like the desert sun. Her first thought was to run. But running was the one thing she could not do smoothly anymore. Her baby slowed her, and danger was already too close behind her. She backed up a few more steps, clutching her belly, unsure of what she feared more now, the men who had been following her, or the hanged man who was somehow alive. She looked around the wide land, hoping someone else might appear, someone who could explain what she had just seen. But the plains stretched out empty in every direction, nothing but sand, rock, and distant hills. The only living souls in sight were her and the man who should have been dead. She whispered, "Why are your eyes open? How are you breathing?" A low groan escaped his throat, rough and strained, as if the sound had to fight its way past days of silence. His shoulders shifted slightly, another impossible sign of life. The rope creaked again, tightening as he tried to lift his head a little more. She could see the effort hurt him. She could see he was not trying to scare her. He was simply trying to exist. Fear wrapped around her like cold chains, but she could not look away. The man blinked once, slow and heavy, like someone waking from a long sleep beneath deep soil. His lips moved again, forming the start of a word she could not make out. She felt a shiver roll up her spine despite the heat. Nothing in this land ever came back from a hanging. Nothing. She looked around once more, praying for a sign, a rider, a traveler, anyone at all. But no one came. She was alone with the impossible. Then the man's eyes shifted past her shoulder, looking at something behind her. His expression changed, not to fear, but to warning. His fingers tightened again, as if he were trying to reach out. She spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. Expecting to see whoever she had been running from, there was nothing there, just wind, sand, and empty ground. She turned back to the man, breath shaking. "What are you trying to tell me?" His chest rose again, slow and painful. This time, his lips formed a clearer shape, though no full sound came out. She leaned a little closer, trying to read the word. It looked like a name or a place, or maybe a warning. She could not be sure. Her pulse hammered faster. The desert air pressed down on her. She felt caught between life behind her and death in front of her. With no safe path either way, the man blinked again, more urgently now. His eyes darted toward her feet, then toward the open ground beside the hanging frame. His breath hitched. His fingers curled hard, muscles fighting the rope. She followed his gaze, trying to see what he wanted her to notice. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. But the man's eyes would not look away from that patch of ground. She felt her knees weaken. All she wanted was to save her baby, to keep running, to reach shelter before nightfall. But now something new held her in place. Something unseen. Something the hanged man seemed desperate for her to understand. The wind picked up again, swirling dust around her ankles. The man's lips shaped one more silent word, and before she could figure it out, the sand behind her shifted. The sand shifted behind her as if something beneath the surface had taken a slow, hungry breath. The pregnant woman froze, her boots sinking slightly as she tried to keep still. A thin crack raced through the ground, not loud enough to echo, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. She felt her heart hammer against her ribs. The hanged man's eyes stayed locked on her, wide with warning. His fingers twitched again, urging her without a single sound. She did not dare move at first. The land felt strange, alive in a way that made her skin prickle. She kept one hand on her belly and lowered herself slightly, ready to run if she had to. The wind picked up and swept loose sand across her skirt, making it flap against her legs. She slowly turned her head to look behind her again. The crack in the ground widened only the slightest amount, then stopped as if the desert held itself back. Nothing emerged. No animal. No rider. Nothing. Still, she did not trust it. Her breath trembled as she turned toward the hanged man once more. His eyes were full of something she couldn't understand, somewhere between pain and need. She had no idea how he had survived or how he still lived. She only knew he was trying to tell her something urgent. She wanted to ask him more questions, but fear held the words inside her. She glanced again at the other three men hanging beside him. Their bodies remained still and lifeless, their shadows long against the sand. Not a single breath came from any of them. Only the second man breathed. Only he watched her. She felt torn between running and staying. She had been on the move since dawn, her body sore and tired. She had not eaten. She had barely had water. She had pushed herself because she had no other choice. Something behind her had made her flee her cabin, something worse than the heat, worse than fear itself. Yet now, in front of her, stood a new kind of danger she could not name. Her voice came out weak. "I don't understand." The man's lips parted, and this time she heard a faint rasp, a dry, broken whisper. She stepped closer instinctively, though every bone in her body told her not to. He tried again, forcing breath past the rope. She leaned in, straining to hear. His voice sounded like sand being dragged across stone, barely alive. "Run." He whispered the word, scraped through the air, and left her frozen. She stepped back quickly, clutching her belly again. She tried to make sense of the warning. Run from what? From him? From whatever had split the ground moments earlier? From whoever had put him there in the first place? She looked around the empty land again, waiting for something to make sense. But the desert kept its secrets. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't allow to fall. She wiped her face and forced a breath through trembling lips. She wanted to ask him more, but his eyes had already begun to dim, as if speaking that one word had taken all the life he had left. His fingers loosened, barely hanging on to their last bit of strength. His gaze drifted upward and then back down to her again, weaker than before. She felt a pull toward him, not out of trust, but out of the strange weight of his warning. She took one slow step closer. "Why?" she whispered. "Who's coming?" The hanged man did not answer. His breath rattled faintly, then faded to the shallow rise and fall of someone trapped between life and death. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked down at the sand again. The crack had not deepened, but something about it made her uneasy. It looked fresh, like the land itself had flinched. She backed away from the hanging frame, her steps small and careful. Her boots left uneven prints behind her. She kept her gaze on the desert, trying to listen for anything unusual. Every sound felt louder than it should. Every gust of wind felt like it carried a warning. Her mind drifted back to the night before, to the moment she knew she had to run. That sound outside her cabin was nothing like she had heard before. A heavy, dragging noise that seemed to circle her home with slow intent. She remembered how the lantern flickered when she grabbed it. She remembered holding her small bag of clothes and food against her chest while her belly tightened with fear. She remembered praying for strength, for courage, for one more chance to save the life inside her. She had lived in that stretch of land her whole life. She knew every ridge, every dry creek bed, every path through the sagebrush. She knew the stories people whispered about the plains, about strange lights and old spirits and things buried where they should never be disturbed. But she had always taken those tales as nothing more than old talk meant to scare travelers. She never believed any of it. Not until the night she felt that presence outside her cabin, listening, waiting. The memory sent a cold shiver down her arms despite the sun. She pushed the thought from her mind and forced her breathing to steady. She needed to focus on the present. Something was wrong in the desert. Something the hanged man knew. Something he wanted her to run from. She looked up at him again. His eyes fluttered open one more time, barely. He looked like he wanted to speak. She waited, hoping for another word, but his lips only trembled, no sound coming. His eyes slid shut slowly, as if the weight of the rope had finally taken hold. She took a step back, then another. She kept her gaze on him until she felt far enough away to turn around. Every inch of her body trembled with fear and exhaustion. The sun was lowering, painting the sky with long shadows stretching across the sand. She needed to find shelter before darkness. She needed water. She needed a safe place to rest her body and her baby. But she also needed answers. As she walked away, she glanced over her shoulder at the hanging frame. The three bodies remained still. The second man's body now hung as lifeless as the rest. Only the faintest movement of the rope gave away that he had ever been alive. She felt her throat tighten. She did not know if he would breathe again, or if he had given his last bit of life to warn her. She kept walking. But the feeling of being watched did not leave her. She looked at the hills in the distance. They seemed farther than she remembered, their shadows long and heavy. The sky above grew a bit dimmer as the sun dipped lower. Night would come soon, and night was when the land changed. Night was when she feared the most. Her steps grew slower as her body tired. Her breath became heavy. She could feel her baby shifting slightly, as if sensing her fear. She pressed her hand against her belly and whispered a soft promise, telling the little one she would not stop. She would get them to safety. The wind picked up again, warmer this time, curling around her like a restless hand. She lifted her skirt slightly to walk faster, but her legs ached. She had no place to go except forward. She could not go back home. She could not stay by the hanged men. She had to reach the old trading route before nightfall. If she followed it long enough, she might find a wagon team or a traveler who would help her. Or at least she hoped so. Then she smelled something faint in the wind. Smoke. She froze mid-step, her breath held tight. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant someone out there. She turned her head slowly, trying to find the source. At first, she saw nothing. Then a thin line of gray rose from behind a distant ridge. Curling into the sky, her heart lifted with a small spark of hope, but fear quickly shadowed it. Not all fires meant safety. Some meant danger. Some meant the wrong people had made camp. She hesitated. Her instincts pulled her in two different directions. Go toward the smoke and risk meeting whoever set the fire, or stay in the open desert and face whatever had chased her from her home. Neither choice felt safe. The ground beneath her boots trembled lightly, so soft she almost missed it, like a small ripple traveling through the sand. She blinked and placed her hand on her stomach, unsure if the tremor had been real or just her imagination. Then it came again. A faint shake, a small shift in the land. Her heart dropped. She slowly turned her head back toward the hanging frame in the distance. The men still hung quietly, but the air around them felt heavier, the shadows deeper. The warning stronger. She took a step toward the smoke, then another. The land trembled again, and somewhere behind her, the rope of one of the hanged men creaked. The rope creaked again, so faint and distant she almost believed it was only the wind teasing her fears. But the sound pulled her attention backward as sharply as a hand on her shoulder. She stopped in the middle of the open desert, the warmth of the sand seeping through her boots, and turned halfway to look over her shoulder. The hanging frame stood far behind her, its wood dark against the fading sky. The four bodies hung silent, unmoving. Nothing seemed different. Nothing looked alive. Yet she felt watched. She placed her hand on her belly and breathed through the tightness in her ribs. Her baby moved gently, as if sensing her worry. She whispered a soft promise to calm herself, and forced her eyes back toward the thin trail of smoke curling up behind the distant ridge. She knew she had to reach it before the last bit of light bled out of the desert. Night was always colder than it looked out here, and danger grew teeth when darkness settled. Her boots pressed into the sand as she pushed forward again, one careful step after another. Her breath came rough and tired. She had been traveling since early morning after leaving everything behind. Her cabin, her small garden, her few belongings, all left because something had circled her home like it owned the night. Something heavy, something patient. She still heard that dragging sound in her mind every time. The wind brushed against her ears. The land stretched wide around her. To her left, low hills sloped gently, fading into dry brush and rock. To her right, the plains opened into a long stretch of cracked earth, the sun now staining it a deep orange. She walked faster, though her body begged for rest. The smoke grew thicker as she approached the rise. Hope mingled with fear in her chest. She needed help. She needed shelter. But she dared not trust anyone easily, not after what she had seen. When she reached the base of the ridge, she paused to catch her breath. She leaned against a sun-warmed rock, feeling the strain in her back and shoulders. Her throat was dry. She pulled a small canteen from her bag and shook it lightly, only a few drops inside. She drank them anyway, letting the coolness coat her tongue. She wished she had saved more, but fear had made her drink too fast earlier. Her gaze drifted to the top of the ridge. The smoke rose from just beyond it. She gathered her strength and began to climb the uneven slope. The rocks shifted under her boots, and the climb forced her to brace her body with every step. By the time she reached the top, her breathing had grown ragged, but she did not stop. She knelt low and peered over the ridge. Below lay a small camp. A single fire burned in the center, its flames low but steady. A pot rested near the embers. 3 horses were tied to a post made from 2 dead branches. But what made her heart beat faster were the 2 figures sitting near the fire. One was sharpening a long knife on a stone. The other was rolling a cigarette between calloused fingers. Both looked worn by travel, their clothes dusty and rough. She ducked behind the rock before either could glance up her way. Her pulse raced. She had no idea who they were. Traitors, scouts, outlaws, or the very men she had been running from. She listened carefully, hoping to hear their voices. At first, there was only the crackle of fire. Then the one with the cigarette spoke. "You sure they ain't following us?" His voice was low and rough. Like someone who had spent years shouting over horses and storms. "They were too scared too," the other man said. "No one goes near that stretch now. Not after what happened." Her blood chilled. She kept herself still, only breathing shallowly. She strained to hear more. "You think she made it out?" the first man said. The second man gave a slow shrug. "Don't know. Don't much care. She should have stayed home instead of digging up things that ain't meant to be touched." Her chest tightened. They were talking about her. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from gasping. The man with the knife leaned closer to the fire. "That land's cursed. Always was. Folks knew to stay away." But she kept digging around them old places, looking for things better left buried. Our mind raced. She had not dug anything. She had hardly left her cabin, except for water and wood. Yet these men believed otherwise. Or maybe they were lying to each other. She could not tell. The first man tossed something into the fire, and a small cloud of sparks rose. "Don't matter. If she's alive, she won't last long out there." Something was already watching her. The second man paused, his sharpening. "Yeah, I felt it too. Saw the tracks this morning. Deep ones, dragging." Her heart stopped for a moment. The dragging sound. The heavy presence. They had seen it too. She pressed her back against the rock, her breath shaking. The desert had grown darker while she listened. The sky deepened to a soft violet, and the sun sank lower. She could not stay where she was. If these men were dangerous, they might find her. If she stayed alone, whatever had chased her might return. She needed to think. She needed another choice. But the desert offered none. A sudden breeze lifted her skirt, carrying sand across the ridge. One of the men looked up quickly, scanning the rocks. She dropped lower, heart pounding, her fingers digging into the dirt. "I heard something," he muttered. "Probably the wind, maybe." He stood anyway. His boots crunched toward the ridge. She held her breath as his shadow grew closer. She pressed her body tighter to the ground, hoping the fading light would hide her. Her baby shifted, and she prayed the movement had no sound. The man stepped closer, peering up the slope. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she thought he would climb. Then a sound rolled across the plains, a deep rumble, a trembling wave through the earth. The man froze, knife gripped tightly. He looked back toward the desert behind them. The second man stood as well, staring at the open land with wide eyes. "What was that?" he whispered. The rumble came again, this time stronger. The ground beneath her hand shook lightly. The horses in the camp stomped nervously and pulled at their ties. The fire crackled louder. The men exchanged uneasy glances. "That's comin' from the old ground," one of them said. "The place where they hanged the four?" She felt her breath catch. The campfire popped, sending sparks into the air. "That place should be still," the other man said quietly. "Ain't been movement there for weeks." "Not since the hanging." Another tremor rolled through the land, stronger, longer. She felt it in her bones. The ridge beneath her seemed to pulse with it. The men stepped back, fear creeping into their faces. Something in the distance let out a sound like a long, low moan. Not human. Not wind. Something older. She pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. The men grabbed their rifles. The horses reared. The fire flickered. Another moan drifted across the plains. This one closer. The men backed toward the horses in a hurry, cursing under their breath. The firelight flickered wildly across their faces. She watched them, heartbeat racing. They looked terrified. They looked like men who had seen something in the desert they wished they never had. One of them pointed toward the horizon, movement slow, heavy, dragging. She felt her whole body tighten. She slowly raised her head over the edge of the ridge to see. What they saw, a shape moved. Across the sand, far away, barely visible, but moving, dragging something behind. The men scrambled to untie the horses. Panic rising, the shape moved closer, and every step it took made the ground tremble beneath her. She clutched, her belly as her breath hitched. The men mounted there. Horses. The fire flared once more. The shape grew larger, and then the trembling reached her feet again, harder, faster, as if something very big was coming. The trembling under her hands grew stronger, spreading through the ridge like a heartbeat in the earth itself. She pulled herself lower against the rocks, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Down below, the two men had managed to untie the horses, their hands shaking so badly they almost dropped the reins. The horses snorted and stomped, sensing the same danger she felt building in the air. Smoke from the campfire whipped sideways as the wind shifted, the flames flickering like they wanted to run away too. The shape on the horizon drew nearer, and though it was still far, she could see how it moved. It didn't walk like a man, nor like any animal she knew. Its weight pushed deep impressions into the sand, each step slow but powerful. Something dragged behind it, making a long mark across the ground like a plow cutting through dry earth. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered for the baby to stay calm. She could barely calm herself, but she tried. She had to be steady if she wanted to survive whatever was coming. The men mounted their horses and pulled them sharply, trying to steady the frightened animals. One of the men looked up at the ridge again, his eyes scanning the rocks. She ducked her head just enough to stay hidden. She could hear him muttering to the other man, "The ground ain't supposed to move like that. We should have stayed away from that place. We're hired to find her. We can't leave now. Ain't chasing nobody with that thing walking around." She felt another pulse of fear at his words. Hired to find her. She hadn't known she was being hunted. She thought she was running from something nameless, not from men paid to track her. She didn't know who would want to find her or why, but she had no time to unravel that now. She watched the two men as they argued, their voices low and tense. Then the shape in the distance moved again, closer now, and both men fell silent. The horses whinnied and tried to pull away. One of the men cursed under his breath and dug his heels in, trying to get the horse under control. The other man looked out toward the horizon, shading his eyes with one hand. His face went pale. "It's heading straight for us." The ground quivered again, small rocks jumping along the ridge beside her. Her breath caught in her throat. She needed to move. She needed to get out of sight before the men, or the thing on the plains, spotted her. Slowly and quietly, she pushed herself back from the edge. Crawling on hands and knees until she reached a thicker pile of rocks farther up the slope, she crouched behind them, breathing hard. Her body trembled with exhaustion. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. She needed to choose her moment to slip away. But her legs felt heavy, her back aching from the long day. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, gathering what strength she had left. Below, the men turned their horses toward the trail that curved along the ridge. One of them shouted, "We ride now," and kicked his horse into motion. The second man followed, though the fear in his face remained clear. The horses bolted, hooves kicking sand behind them, racing along the edge of the hills. Their flight raised a cloud of dust that drifted toward her. She watched them go, but her attention kept shifting back to the shifting figure across the plains. It was closer now, clearer. She could see broad shoulders, a hunched posture, and something dragging behind it that caught the sun with a dull shine. It looked like metal or chains. She shuddered and pulled herself to her feet. She knew she couldn't stay near this ridge any longer. She needed to move toward the rocks leading away from the camp, hiding her steps in the growing twilight. She slipped between two boulders and followed the narrow path along the ridge, keeping low and steady. Each step was painful, her body heavy under the weight of fear and pregnancy, but she forced herself forward. She moved as quickly as she could until the ridge curved and she was out of sight of the camp. Her breath thinned with relief, but she didn't stop. The land dropped gently ahead, opening into a small basin where scattered brush offered thin cover. She paused at the edge, scanning for movement. The desert wind carried only sand and silence. She climbed down the slope carefully. The basin felt safer than the open plains, but she knew the safety was thin, fragile. As she reached the bottom, she hid behind a fallen tree trunk and took a moment to breathe. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her baby nudged her ribs softly. She whispered a promise again. She looked back toward the ridge. The smoke from the campfire still curled into the sky. But the two men on horseback were now small dust trails disappearing toward the distant river path. The shape on the plains paused as if listening, then it turned slightly, angling its approach toward where the men had ridden rather than toward her. She exhaled softly, a small moment of relief. But the relief didn't last long. The trembling didn't stop. She leaned forward and touched the sand. It vibrated beneath her hand like something stirring beneath the surface. She pulled her hand back quickly, heart pounding anew. That shake wasn't from the figure on the horizon. It was something else. Something closer. The basin ground gave a soft groan. She moved quickly behind the next rock, her breath tight, her mind racing. She didn't know if the earth itself was unstable or if something moved beneath it. She didn't want to know. But she needed to keep moving. As she slipped from one rock to another, she thought about what the men had said. They believed she had dug something up. They believed she had disturbed something ancient. She remembered how weeks ago she had found old stones arranged near her cabin. She had moved one of them to make room for her washing basin. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time. She swallowed hard. Had that been the beginning? Her thoughts broke when a sound drifted across the basin. A long, low groan. Not human. Not animal. A sound the earth shouldn't make. She froze, gripping a rock for balance. The groan rolled under her feet. Her heart thudded painfully. She forced herself to keep going. Climbing up the far edge of the basin toward another set of rocks that looked solid and safe enough to hide behind. The climb was steep, and her legs trembled, but she made it to the top. She turned toward the plains again, breathing heavily. The distant figure was closer now, its body clearer. It was tall, thin, its arms hung low. Its steps were slow, but certain, like it followed something familiar. The metal dragging behind it scraped the earth, leaving a scar across the land. It turned again, shifting its direction slightly, following the dust left by the two men, but then it paused. It lifted its head, and it looked toward the ridge, where she had been. A chill spread through her. It took another step, turning its body her way. Its dragging burdens scraped deeper into the earth. She stepped back quickly, nearly stumbling on loose stones. Her fear surged. She needed to get away before the thing fixed its path toward her. She ran along the rocks, her breath fast and shallow, her hand clutching her belly tightly. The sky darkened to a deep blue. The first stars began to show. The desert grew colder. She wrapped her arms around herself as she hurried, the wind cutting against her skin. She kept going until the land dipped again into a dry wash, a place where floods had carved deep channels during storms. She made her way down into the wash, grateful for the deep shadows it offered. The walls rose high around her, blocking much of the open view. She followed the winding path of the wash, hoping it would lead her toward safer ground. But even here, the earth trembled, faint, barely noticeable, but real. She slowed and leaned against the wall of the wash, breath trembling. She couldn't keep running like this forever. Her strength was nearly gone. If she didn't rest soon, her body might give out before morning. She listened carefully. No footsteps. No dragging metal. No shouts. Just the cold wind whispering through the wash. She slid down to sit on the ground, wrapping her arms around her knees. She rested her head against the rock behind her, trying to calm her breathing. Her baby shifted softly, reminding her she wasn't alone. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she heard it, not from the plains, not from the ridge, but from somewhere within the wash itself. A faint scraping. Sound, slow, close. She lifted her head, heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. She turned toward the bend in the wash. Staring into the deepening shadows, the scraping sound grew louder. She pushed herself up. Gripping the wall for balance, something was moving toward her, closer and closer. She backed away slowly, fear tightening every muscle in her body. Whatever was coming was only a few steps away now. The scraping sound drew closer until it echoed off both walls of the wash, turning the narrow space into a chamber of whispers. She pressed her back against the cool rock, one hand on her belly, refusing to give in to fear. She had run too far to let panic win now. Her breath came slow and shallow as she waited for whatever rounded the bend. A shadow stretched along the sand first, long and uneven. Then a shape stepped forward into the dim starlight. But it wasn't a creature. It wasn't anything monstrous or twisted from the earth. It was a man. He stumbled into view, dragging a metal canteen and a broken shovel behind him, both tied to his belt and scraping the ground with every step. His clothes were torn and dusty, his face rough with days of travel. When his tired eyes met hers, he froze in place. She saw confusion first, then worry, then something softer. He raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Ma'am," he said, breathless. "I've been looking for you." She staggered back a step, unsure, her heart still pounding from all she had imagined. "Why?" He took one slow, careful step closer, keeping his hands raised. "I ain't with the men who chased you. I left them a day ago. I knew they were macking trouble they had no right to. I've been trying to get to you before they did." His voice carried honesty she could feel, not just here. Even then she waited. She needed more. He swallowed, gathering his breath. "There's talk in the town. Folks say something was disturbed near your land. But I know you didn't go digging for old things. You just moved a stone. You didn't know it was one of the markers?" She blinked, surprise and fear mixing. "A marker for what?" "Old ground," he said. "Burial places meant to stay quiet. The kind of places the hanged men were guarding. That's why they were there in the desert. Not just punishment. They volunteered to keep that land safe. You're moving that stone loosened something under the soil? Not a creature. Not a spirit. Just a shift in the rocks that made the ground groan." She felt her breath release slowly. So the strange tremors, the dragging sound, all the fear that had driven her into the desert had come from the earth itself, shifting under its own weight. Her imagination had filled the rest. And the hanged man waking, the warning he gave her, suddenly made sense. He had survived long enough to keep her from walking across the softened ground where the earth might collapse. She felt her knees weaken. Relief swept over her so fast, tears stung her eyes. "I thought something terrible was following me." The man nodded gently. "Fear can make shadows grow big, but you ain't alone. I want to help you. The men who chased you are gone. They think you ran toward the canyon. They won't come here." She let herself breathe again, slowly, fully. Her baby pressed against her ribs, as if feeling the change inside her. She placed her hand softly over her belly and looked at the stranger with tired gratitude. "My name's not important," he said softly. "But I want you to know I raised 3 children alone after my wife passed. I know fear. I know how heavy it sits when you're carrying a little one. Let me help you find a safe place to rest. The night's getting cold." His voice steadied her more than the rock behind her. She nodded slowly, and he stepped closer, taking care to keep his movements gentle. He guided her along the wash until they reached a wider clearing where a shallow cave cut into the wall. The cave wasn't deep, but it offered shelter from the wind and enough warmth to calm her shaking limbs. He gathered brush from the wash, lit a small fire, and handed her his canteen. She drank slowly, grateful for the cool water on her tongue. He sat across from her, close enough to watch over her, but far enough to respect her space. The flames flickered between them, casting soft light over the cave walls. She felt the tension drain from her shoulders for the first time since leaving home. After a long silence, she spoke. "Why were those men hired to find me?" He sighed. "The men thought you'd found gold or something valuable in that marked land. They wanted it for themselves. They didn't care if the land was meant to stay untouched. I didn't want any part of that." He paused. "Your fear saved you. They won't come back this way." She stared into the fire, letting the warmth settle into her bones. "And the man who warned me, the one hanging from the frame, was he really guarding that ground?" The stranger nodded. "Those men were part of an old promise made generations ago. They weren't hanged for crime. They sacrificed themselves to stay bound to that land. Their bodies were placed there as a warning so folks would keep away from the shifting ground. His voice softened. One of them must have still had breath in him, long enough to warn you. She felt a deep ache bloom in her chest, not of fear, but of something like sorrow and gratitude mixed together. He saved my life. He did, the man said. And now you've got to save your own. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the desert night settled in quiet and calm. No trembling ground. No strange sounds. Just the wind brushing the wash in slow waves. She leaned back against the cave wall, resting a hand on her belly as the baby shifted again. I don't know where to go from here. The man smiled gently. You go somewhere safe. There's a ranch 3 miles north. A good family there. They owe me a favor. They'll help you until your baby comes and long after if you need it. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were warm, not frightened. Why help me? Because someone needs to, he said. And because I see strength in you. You ran through the desert alone, carrying a life inside you, and you didn't stop. That kind of courage deserves a chance. She lowered her gaze and touched the ground lightly, grounding herself in the simple truth of his words. She had run because she had no choice. She had survived because she refused to give up. Now, for the first time in days, she felt the road ahead might hold something other than fear. They rested through the night in the warmth of the cave. The stranger kept the fire burning steady while she slept. In the early morning, when pale light touched the horizon, he helped her stand and guided her out of the wash. The air was crisp but gentle. The desert looked softer in the dawn, as if the land itself had loosened its hold on her. He led her along a narrow path through the rocks, steadying her when the ground sloped too sharply. When they reached the final ridge, the land opened into a small valley with a wooden house in the distance and smoke rising from its chimney. A ranch. A home. A place where fear would not follow. She felt her chest swell with hope. The stranger smiled at her. You made it, she nodded, tears gathering in her eyes again. Thank you. You don't owe me thanks, he said softly. Just promise you'll let yourself rest. Let yourself heal. Your baby needs peace now. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling the truth settle into her body. I will. He walked with her until the ranchers spotted them and came running, their faces full of concern and welcome. They took her inside, offered her food, water, and a warm bed. The stranger gave her one last gentle nod before turning back toward the plains. She watched him leave with gratitude, deep enough to last a lifetime. Days passed. Her strength returned. The land grew quiet again. The shifting ground settled. In one clear morning, with sunlight warming the windows, her baby arrived safely in her arms. She held the small, perfect child close and whispered promises of a peaceful life. The world outside had frightened her, but now she had found a place to begin again. Her story ended not with fear, but with hope, and with a future her child would grow into with love and safety. The desert had tested her, but it had also guided her to the place she needed most, and in that quiet room, holding her newborn against her chest, she finally felt safe. The journey had been long, but the ending was gentle, and it was hers.